Hello and welcome to today's AHAM webinar, 2023 CRCP webinar, Credit and Collections. I'd like to introduce your speaker for today, Marcy Marcus, Professional Certification Chair. Marcy, if you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to Credit and Collections webinar. Hopefully some of you were on the last week's presentation. I did access and then Pam did billing. Those of you who were on the access one, this one is a little shorter, not as intense as the access one. You may even get a little bit more of your day back. So with that being said, we'll get started. Again, some of you may have heard this part already, but it's always good to go through, just some study tips because we all learn differently. Some of us haven't had to study and take tests for some time. And so it's a little bit interesting to get back into those study habits. So the biggest thing for me was I read the manual at least 4 times and really focused on the areas that maybe were not my strongest area. Credit and collections is one of my favorite topics. So I scored pretty well on here, but there's other sections not so much. So make sure you really know where your weaknesses are, or maybe you're just not in that area in the business office and in your area of work. Make sure you study daily, just keep that going every day, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes or a half hour every day, keep that process going. I used a lot of flashcards that seem to help. Flashcards are nice because you can, if you're the passenger of a car or you're on an exercise bike or treadmill or something like that, you can always do, flashcards. You don't have to worry about having, your manual available per se. Study groups help also. And sometimes I use Jeopardy style, meaning if I had flashcards, I'd look at the meaning or the answer and then be like, hey, what's the question? So that helps. I also printed, I know people laugh at that, but I made copies or printed the knowledge checks. We'll go through a lot of those today. And I would practice on those knowledge checks that, take the exam. I went through the, vocabulary section and wrote those down and just really spent a lot of time on each of those sections and a variety of, like I said, styles of studying. The one thing to keep in mind is that in the manual, you will see a little F or a P icon throughout the book indicating if it's a facility issue or addressing providers. Remember, both of these are going to be on the exam. It is no longer separated into professional and facility billing. So make sure you read all those. I was always on the professional side, so I really needed to focus on some of the facility processes and rules and regulations. So just be aware of that. Don't let it distract you, but just know that those are what those mean. I always like to have a little fun tip. Eating dark chocolate has actually been a study and does help with memory, obviously reduces stress. But if you need a reason to justify eating some chocolate, here's a good one. You're taking a test. Years and years ago, I was at Epic in the process of being Epic certified. And at the end of the 3 or 4 day training session, they actually handed us little boxes of chocolate. So just a little fun tip for the stress that goes on with studying. The day of the exam, make sure you get a good night's sleep. I know that's hard. I don't sleep when stuff comes up like this because I just am nervous. I'm not a good test taker. Make sure you read the questions carefully. Make sure you watch for trick words like accept, is not, things like that, are key. Take your time. There are similar questions. You'll be like, hey, wait, didn't I just answer something like this? And so probably, there was a question, a couple questions back, very similar wording. go with your gut. Your gut is usually right. I know when I've changed answers, I end up getting it wrong because I went back, didn't trust my gut, and then changed the answer. So go with your gut on that. The exam format and grading is about 250 questions. You have about 4 hours to take the exam. There is true and false, and those are worth 2 points. Multiple choice are worth 5 points. And the number of questions in each section, might vary. And then you need to score a 70% on each section, and that's key. It's each section. Okay, so in order to achieve certification, you need to be able to identify elements of effective collection policy, describe typical self-pay options, understand common bankruptcies, identify responsible parties in different scenarios, our typical delays and stalls with third parties, which we all probably can recite with the back of our hand, explain common debt collection methods and practices, and then just general provisions of the Medicare bad debt policies. You'll also need to know requirements on charitable tax exempt hospitals imposed by our Section 501R. And then just to describe common metrics related to collections are also part of how to achieve your passing certification. So, healthcare providers, sometimes, we get involved in credit and collections when patients don't fully pay their financial obligations, either, at the time of service or after the date of service. So, it's always hard. I know a lot of people don't like to make collection calls. I know a lot of people don't like to place accounts with third-party collections, but, sometimes our hands are kind of tied with that. There are some patients that they just don't pay their accounts. They just, wait till it goes to collections, or they just never pay. So we'll walk through some of those scenarios and how we can, try to avoid some of those situations. So it's always important to have a effective collection policy. You want to have some of those elements to a policy is an admission policy, minimum acceptable payments. You want to have a good follow-up policy, including the title and role of the person responsible for account follow-up. A public relations policy. If sometimes it's a PR issue when you start making collection calls and stuff around holidays. I know here, I live in Wisconsin, that would always be the time that someone would go to the newspaper and talk about collection policies, and then it gets to be a public relation policy. So how would we handle that? Charity care requirements and protocols, discount policy, practice for charging interest if anyone does that anymore. Contract amounts, when is the age of an account considered uncollectible and you're going to prepare it for bad debt. Determining financial responsibility, sometimes that gets to be kind of tricky. And how are we going to handle any processing, any errors and or complaints. So when we talk about credit and collections, we're talking a lot about self-pay options. Offering payments for self-pay balances can obviously be effective, and obviously we always want to ask for payment in full, or we need to set up some payments. So always cash or check if people still write checks anymore. Credit cards, that is a big source of payment. I know when I go into my clinic, I can't get past registration without inserting my credit card in the little kiosk to get my copay paid. We still have health savings accounts, and sometimes we even have, a credit union might have some funds. There's also loan programs that we're going to talk about, money orders. I know some of these might seem a little, outdated, but there are money orders, there's money transfers, multiple options to try to resolve our self-pay. So years ago, it was common for providers to allow patients, to make small payments over a long period of time, and rarely did they charge any interest. But now most providers are no longer able to do this as reimbursements, continue to decline. Cash flow is very important. A lot of patients can't pay large balances in a short amount of time. So many providers are starting to use loan programs so patients can extend their payments over a long period of time. And with those loan options, there are two main types of loan programs. One is factoring of receivables with recourse. Recourse factoring is an agreement with the provider and the factoring company who sells it current invoices with an understanding that the provider will buy them back if they go uncollected. So the provider accepts a default risk with these recourse programs. There is also the factoring of receivables without recourse. So again, with and without. So keywords to watch during the exam. Without recourse means there is a complete, extensive check on the customer's creditworthiness. And once the invoices are sold to the factoring company, the provider is not liable for any non-payment. The financial institutions accepts all that default. Sorry, I have lots of notes here, so I want to make sure I get everything covered for you guys. Credit cards. Credit cards, like I said, are huge nowadays. I remember when credit cards weren't that big of a deal and facilities and doctors were like, ooh, that's kind of like businessy and transactions. But we are a business and we do need to get our charges paid. As we know, if you point of service, it's easier to do it that way than on the back end. Those little co-pays can add up to be big dollars. We have people with high deductible. So one way to, help that revenue cycle and, outstanding dollars is to get credit card payments. Obviously with credit is advantages and there's always going to be disadvantages. So some of the advantages, it's immediate payment. You got it. Payment methods can be taken over the phone. Reoccurring payments could be set up and, obtain permission to charge your credit card after your insurance pays. So those are some great advantages to having a credit card payment. However, with disadvantages, there's additional costs. So there's going to be a credit card processing fee. Again, potential public relations issues with, having to pay interest. And then additional work just to follow up. And with the credit card payment industries, you have to keep up with, obviously, all of those. So if you're not getting a credit card payment or someone needs to, extend their payment plans, that is also an option. So you could do 3 monthly installments, maybe with cash, periodic payments without finance charge or with finance charge, or lowered payments now, and then maybe get a balloon payment later. Some of those are, hey, can you pay 50% today and then maybe 25% over the next 2 months, or maybe some of their other medical debt's going to be paid and in a month or so, and then they can make that big balloon payment. So always options to try to work with that patient to get those types of payment plans taken care of. Unfortunately, bankruptcy is out there, for our patients, and this is obviously a legal process taken with the debts of an individual or a company far exceed their assets, and this is presumably no reasonable hope of repayment. Bankruptcy is handled through our U.S. court system within the state residence. So there are a couple types of bankruptcies out there. Chapter 7, which I kind of think is the most common. This is where the debtor does not have any means to repay the debt. The assets are divided among any creditors. Legal fees, attorney fees, court costs, they're always paid first. Secured debts that have collateral, such as your mortgage, those are repaid second, and then unsecured debt. We are considered an unsecured debt. Our bills go to the bottom of the pile. So this is the only bankruptcy filing where the debt may be completely dissolved. In order for a patient to qualify for Chapter 7, they must pass what is called the means test. If a patient's average monthly income for 6 months preceding filing for the bankruptcy is less than or equal to the median income in their state, then the debtor can file for a Chapter 7. If a patient's income is too high, and they pass the second part of the means test, which assesses whether the debtor has enough disposable income to pay, then that would be converted to a Chapter 13 plan. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Chapter 11, you occasionally see these. These are more like a reorganization bankruptcy. It's for distressed businesses. It's a reprieve from creditor claims. It continues to function and work out repayment plans. So this is more of a business type. You might see these once in a while. Chapter 12, again, you may not see as often depending in your area, but this is what is considered a farmer's type of bankruptcy for farmers, and provides that only a family farmer with regular annual income may file a petition of release. I know when these would come up, I'd have to start, researching these. I usually would call our collection agency and say, can you help me with this process? But there is for the farmers out there. And then, as we just mentioned with Chapter 7, some of those get converted to a Chapter 13 because their regular income is high enough to support a payment plan. And the courts decide on how much will be paid on a monthly basis. A couple things to keep in mind: payments would be directly to the bankruptcy trustee and distributed among the creditors and debtors with no direct contact from the creditor themselves. Generally, after 5 years, the repayment plan will be cured of the debt. Once the plan is successfully completed, the remaining debt is erased. So there's two potential outcomes from a bankruptcy. When the debtor meets the terms of the bankruptcy proceedings, the bankruptcy is granted or discharged by the court. Discharge means the petitioner is declared insolvent, assets are liquidated, and you're protected from your creditors. If the debtor fails to meet the terms, such as not disclosing all assets or not appearing as required, the bankruptcy is dismissed. In such case, the petition is thrown out. The debtor is not declared bankrupt and is not protected from the creditors. Also important to note, dismissals are important because in these situations, creditors are free to put the account back on the collection cycle and pursue the debt. So I know that usually gets probably one of the bigger questions I used to get when I managed revenue cycle folks was the difference between discharged and dismissed. With bankruptcies, there is creditor notification, and these are very important steps that you want to take. So you want to flag that patient's account. You want to include, what chapter are they filing, what court jurisdiction it's going to be in, who the legal counsel is going to be, and the phone number. Suspend all collection activities, final disposition and notice from the bankruptcy court. Cease all contact with the patient demanding payment in full. Notify any third-party collection agencies that might be handling the account, send them a copy of that notice, or any other third-party agents that are involved. And then if you do receive payments, because maybe there's charges that are pending insurance for the data service involved with that bankruptcy, you would want to also notify any payments that are received to those third parties. Also, another important tip, if the patient or responsible party states they had filed for petition, it is important to obtain a copy of that notice. It is the responsible party, if the responsible party failed to list your hospital as a debt, it is not included in that petition. So it's important to make sure that you are named in that petition. If you are not, then you're not involved with that bankruptcy. And then also any correspondence related to the bankruptcy must be handled carefully to determine if the patient is responsible. Plan a collection strategy if appropriate, or to make sure the proper write-off is handled if necessary. So, if it's discharged, you want to make sure you're writing that off appropriately. Another thing that can be a little confusing, when you're dealing with credit and collections, is determining who. It shouldn't be that hard, but it is. Sometimes determining who is the responsible party. You need to make sure you have this determined correctly. So the responsible party of an adult patient, himself or her, even in the case of an injury or any negligence on behalf of another party. This one gets tricky, is spouses. Spouses are responsible for each other's debt incurred during the marriage. Even if the marriage ends or the spouse dies, if they sign, signed as guarantor, obviously this is dependent upon state law. So important to know what those laws are. The responsible party for a minor patient are both parents, who are jointly and fully responsible and may pursue jointly or separately. This is true whether the parents are married or not. Important to know that we are not listed, in the divorce decree. So it is ultimately those parents' result to get that debt paid. So that always gets to be interesting when you say, well, send it to him, he's responsible, send it to her, she's responsible. Technically, they're both legally responsible for their minor children. Authorization for treatment in life-threatening emergencies is not required prior to treatment. Lack of authorization does not relieve the responsible party for financial services. So, maybe someone's taken by ambulance, they're unconscious to the hospital, they received care, they're still ultimately responsible for that care. When an estate is filed for a deceased person, it is the responsible party for paying all outstanding debt, but often does not have enough funds to do so. So the important part is to understand is that children and other relatives are not responsible for the deceased person's outstanding debt. Should you receive a notice that the patient is deceased, you'd want to take some steps. Make sure it's a legitimate estate exists. Register of wills for an estate. change the mailing address to the estate of, and then that patient's name. There is no estate and no party assumes financial responsibility. You'd probably write off any self-pay remaining balance after there was insurance, if obviously insurance was involved. A conservator, this is something also to be aware of. A conservator is an individual appointed by a court to handle the affairs of another person who is incapable of caring for themselves. The conservator manages the person's finances, reports to the court, but that conservator is not responsible for the liability of those debts. They are not the responsible party. So important to know that fact. To the right slide here. So some of the fun parts about collections is, it's always challenging because you always get some stalls, you always get some delays, but to try and eliminate some of the more common stalls or delays, credit and collection efforts must include the follow-up with third-party payers to improve our cash flow and reduce, your days outstanding. Effective follow-up begins at the aging process. Important to be aware of common reasons for slow payment, to avoid some of these outcomes. Some of our common stalls, the bill was never received by the payer. COB and MSB problems, inaccurate or incomplete patient information, services not covered, no prior auth, there's coding issues, there could be pre-certification issues or recertification issues, there could be timely filing issues, referral not on file, are just a few of those stalls that we run into when trying to resolve those debts or those stalls. So while we're going through those processes, we want to make sure we have some, in-house collection processes. In-house collections is usually a viable alternative for only the largest providers who would have access to the needed tools, such as specialized software and any predictive dialers. But sometimes, we don't have that. We're outsourcing more. But when we do it in-house, collection fees are eliminated. Providers who collect in-house are, we're subject to the same rules as agencies. So critical that in-house collection staff are completely trained and equipped in their roles. Primary objective for in-house collections is obviously to request payment in full of the outstanding balance. And then you want to make sure you prepare to make those collection calls. You just don't want to pick up the phone and just wing it. Several steps should be taken to get ready for that call. You want to make sure you review that account. You want to make sure, was there any payments received recently? Was there any adjustments received? If you charge any late fees, take a look at their entire payment history. Determine what, if any, previous collection efforts were made. Did somebody just call yesterday or 2 days ago? Did maybe the spouse call and talk about the account? So you want to make sure that you're up to date on any previous efforts. Review the patient's, like I said before, review all the payment history. Did they just miss 1 month? Did they never make a payment? Make sure you understand what payments have been received. You obviously want to determine that you speak to the right person. You don't want any violations going on. Determine the minimal acceptable payment plan. You obviously want to ask for payment in full first, but if they can't do that, can you get set up a payment plan like we talked about a little earlier? Maybe they can pay half and then half later, or maybe they can pay half and then break it into 3 pieces after that. So, what is your payment policy and what can you accept? Be prepared for any questions. What might they ask? What have they asked in the past? Make sure they don't say, I have insurance. Make sure you understand all that. If in previous notes they were maybe difficult, make sure you get everything ready to go so you can make that an effective call. And then even prepare an opening statement. Who are you? What are you calling about? It's important to disclose the information about the debt and who you're talking to. Know what their statement history is. Really just be prepared. There's nothing worse than when you make an outbound call and you don't have all your ducks in a row. As we said a little earlier, in-house collections, you really need to follow what our collection agencies do, and that involves, the mini Miranda, which should be provided on all calls. Debt collectors contact debtors, whether it's by mail or by phone, or a statement is provided to the debtor, which mini Mirandas, this is an attempt to collect the debt, and any information obtained will be used for that purpose. I know when I call agencies, it's on the recording, it's on statements, things like that. Debt collectors are only required to give the mini Miranda in the initial communication with that debtor. If a third-party debtor or debt collector, does not provide the mini Miranda, it's actually a violation of the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. So very important to just know what that is and why it's being said. As I said earlier, a lot of clinics, hospitals may not use or want to use collection agencies. Medical, we're in the business to provide care and services, and so sometimes it's uncomfortable to ask for money. And so it's just important people are trained right, or you have the right personality for this. But collection agencies are good in the sense that this is their job. This is, they're specialized in debt collection. So, they're not maybe as nervous, obviously, as maybe a front desk person or someone just brand new in the workforce might be uncomfortable. So they have the skills and the resources available to them. Sometimes they charge either a flat rate or a contingency rate. If you placed an account with a collection agency, that patient probably has a lot of other medical debt at that collection agency, or even a cable bill, things like that. So they're able to distribute those payments amongst all those accounts. They really know what they're up against. So sometimes it is beneficial in those situations. They also help with skip tracing, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, but they have tools for that. Again, they have other bills there that they're looking at, so they could find that address maybe a little bit better than what we could in-house. They also deal with, they report things to the credit bureau. Collection agencies, when they do that, they're going to work with TransUnion, Equifax, probably Experian. And this is going to appear on their credit report. So I know that sounds bad, but sometimes I could always tell when someone was trying to buy something because they call you 5 years later and they want to pay their debt because it's on their credit report. So there are some benefits to that. When you're using a collection agency, sometimes they do pursue legal action, and they will file a lawsuit against that debtor, on your behalf. So those of you who have not participated in small claims court or this piece of it, there's several different types of lawsuit. You could have a judgment, which legally verified the claim against the debtor. It's validated by the courts. The legal right to collect that debt, can be obtained by a lien. So if you get a lien, It's a recorded claim against real or personal property, generally arising out of a debt. If the property is sold by the debtor, the creditor or the provider must be paid out of those proceeds of the sale. I think, hospitals will do the liens, when they're large balances as such. Or you could have a tort liability, and this is a liability for an injury or wrongdoing by one person to another resulting from a breach of legal duty. The entity held liable may look into the insurer to pay the claim. The creditor or the provider may file a lien against those insurance proceeds for payment when a settlement is made. So those could happen. You may not hear of tort liability. I know I've had to focus on it a little bit. I was more familiar with more of the lien and the judgment process. So again, focus on that if you're unsure.
Excuse me, Marcy, we have a question.
Yep.
This person says they feel that they are too small to utilize a collection agency. At what income per year do you feel it would be worth it for a private practice?
I think sometimes you might be small, but look at the size of your balances. And then there are special agencies that will handle small dollars. If you're not a big health, big hospital system, federally qualified health centers, behavioral health, some of those smaller entities will look at the balance and then, like I said, find an agency that will handle smaller balances, handle those $100, $200, $300 balances for you. So I would look at that. They can still do justice for you in claiming and collecting those. They may not pursue legal action, but sometimes just one notice from a collection agency and or a law firm. I've worked with law firms who do collections, and man, you get a letter from a lawyer and sometimes they will pay that quickly. So I think it's beneficial to use them even if you are small. I would look at, like I said, what is the average dollar? If it is a lot of copays, I would look at your front end process to see if you can reduce some of that revenue on the back end by improving your front end process to reduce some of those issues.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. That's always a tough one, is when and if to use those. Skip tracing. Skip tracing is kind of fun. I always like these challenging things. So skip tracing is when an address or a phone number on your account turns out to be incorrect, and efforts to locate the correct information is known as skip tracing. Sometimes it's like, hey, we have mail returns, and then that mail return is, then the process of trying to find that person is called skip tracing. Always fun and challenging. Takes a special person to do it because you really have to dig and trying to find out, what kind of situation you're up against. So there's actually 3 kinds of skip tracing that we may not realize that there's 3. We all just kind of lump it all in. False skip. This is the information is wrong due to the error on the provider. So an example would be, I worked at a facility, and if you just put in the zip code, it would pull in the city for you. Well, if you missed key that zip code, it's going to pull in the wrong city. So instead of being, we maybe wanted it to be McFarland, Wisconsin, where I live, but you typed in, instead of 53558, you typed in 53588. Now it's going to pull in Sun Prairie. So now you're going to get the wrong town. So that would be a false skip where we made an error on our part. Unintentional skip is the patient forgot to provide updated information. This happens, I think, when people don't, when you check in, if you say, is everything still the same, or they don't ask for their address at all, that patient may not realize you have an old address or an old phone number. So this is where it's key to make sure that you say, do you still live at 5216 Broadhead Street, McFarland, Wisconsin? Recite it to them. Don't ask them if everything's the same because they don't know what you have. So this just reaffirms getting this information up front and reiterating it every time you see that patient. Intentional skip. This is the patient who purposely gave false information, to avoid paying the debt. So they're going to give you a bad address. We don't ask, for ID to confirm that address. They get their treatment, they get their medications, and they're gone. So these people do this on purpose. A lot of times you will see this kind of behavior, for those who unfortunately are, trying to, what we call drug seekers. They're giving bad information to get medications. So with that, there are various resources for skip tracing. Agencies have special tools, like Lexis, or I think one used to be like Bloodhound to help with those skip tracings. But, you check with the post office, internet site, credit reports, sometimes checking with their employers and neighbors. Again, just have to be very careful that you're not giving out PHI information. This is where agencies come into play because they're really can work on these things with additional tools to confirm that the address you're obtaining is actually the right address for that patient. Okay, Medicare bad debt provisions. For you, those on the provider side, this is new. Something to, pay attention to. These questions will be on the exam. So Medicare bad debt provisions, when patients do not pay their Medicare, co-insurance and deductible. Medicare sometimes allows these unpaid accounts to be claimed on the cost report as bad debt. A percentage of the bad debt is reimbursed to the provider. The rules are complex, but understand the following. So only the hospital services are reimbursable as a Medicare bad debt. As I said, I was on the provider side. This was very new for me. This includes any deductible and co-insurance amounts. Physician services are not eligible, nor are HMO bad debts, screening mammograms, or any other or anything else paid under a fee schedule. The debt must be actually uncollectible, and the provider must be able to establish that reasonable collection efforts were made. The hospital must attempt to collect the account for a minimum, and this is important. Anytime there's days involved, it's important. So I'll read that again. The hospital must attempt to collect the account for a minimum of 120 days before claiming it as bad debt. If the patient makes a payment, your 120 days starts over. Sound business judgments must be established that there is no likelihood to recover at any time in the future. Proof of collection efforts in-house or with a collection agency must be available for any audit. So make sure you document those efforts and make sure they're available at both parties if you ever get an audit. The patient does not have the means to pay and is given charity. It can be claimed as bad debt, but only if there is appropriate documentation. So like anything, you have to document like crazy. And then we have our 501R of the Affordable Care Act. Section 501R is part of the Affordable Care Act, ACA, which imposes new requirements on charitable tax-exempt hospitals. Each 501c3 hospital or organization is required to meet 4 general requirements on a facility-by-facility basis. And those 4 requirements are listed out here. establish written financial assistance and emergency medical care policies. You know, we talk about these policies all the way from access, you know, through the entire process. So again, so important to have these all documented. Limit amounts charged for emergency or other medically necessary care to individuals eligible for assistance under the hospital's financial policy. Make reasonable efforts, there we go again, make reasonable efforts to determine whether an individual is eligible for assistance under the hospital's financial assistance policy before engaging in these extraordinary collection actions. And then conduct a community health needs assessment and adopt any implementation strategies and review these at least every 3 years. Oops, I went one too far. Okay, where'd my slide go? 24, there we go. Oh, no. Oh, I missed a slide. My apologies. It might be in here somewhere. I had kind of a snafu yesterday, to be honest with you guys. I went to send this webinar to Michael and the team, and it disappeared. So thankfully I had it printed, so I had to redo everything. So my apologies for not having our calculating metrics. But calculating metrics is, you're going to find in your manual, there's a couple pages on it, calculating metrics and comparing them over time to monitoring your credit and collections. So we would have net recovery is the total dollar amount recovered by a collection agency less the fees. So remember that most agencies charge a contingency fee, but some actually do charge a flat rate. So read through how that calculation works. Then you have net recovery, and net recovery is the rate is the percentage of dollars referred to a collection agency that is returned to the provider, converting your net recovery to a percentage rate for easy comparison. These were, even though credit and collections is, you know, my happy place and I love doing it, I was fortunate that our CFO and my director did all these calculations. So I still had to focus a lot on these areas. Plus we had agencies that just charged flat rates. So I didn't have to worry about contingencies, things like that. So again, focus on these areas if you're not sure. And then you have net bad debt percentage, and the net bad debt percentage is the amount of revenue that ultimately gets written off as bad debt. It's important to use net figures because revenue is reduced by contractual allowances, and some bad debt does go to recovery. So focus on those, look at the calculations, know those for your exam. So again, my apologies that slide was missing during my little snafu yesterday. I had a slight heart attack, to say the least. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, your manual has all kinds of knowledge checks. As I said, I printed these. I made little study packets. You know, if I got done doing access and then I started in on billing, then I would maybe go back throughout my billing and then make sure I stayed up on my access piece and would do those knowledge checks. So for me, it was very good practice to do these knowledge checks. So I have several of them here. My apologies. I did want to do some polling and for participation, but time also got away from me. So my apologies. So the first knowledge check. Which of the following is not, and you can see not is in italics. Again, watch for those little words, is not recommended. It's not a recommended element of a written collection policy, and select one. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Have your answer in your mind, jot it on a sheet of paper. So again, which of the following is not a recommended element of a written collection policy? And the answer is the name of the collection agency being used. Next one. What is the name of the type of loan where the provider accepts the default risk? A little bit more information. If the patient or debtor defaults on the loan, the provider must pay back the financial institution. This was kind of at the beginning of our presentation when we talked about loans. So factoring of reasonable with recourse. So this is, as they said, where the provider must pay back the financial institution. Which of the following is a regulation of the payment card industry? Select one. So which of the following is a regulation in the payment card industry? Data that has served its purpose must be immediately destroyed. Which of the following is not true of an extended payment plan offered by a provider? Select one. Again, which of the following is not? I am one of those people that really need to focus on those because I tend to like scan the question and not always pick up on that. So I know my habits when testing. And this is not true that the provider legally must charge at least a small finance charge. Which of the following is not true of the potential outcomes of a bankruptcy? When a debtor meets the terms of the bankruptcy proceedings, the bankruptcy is granted or discharged. The dismissal means the petitioner is declared insolvent, assets are liquidated, and the petitioner is protected. The debtor fails to meet the terms, such as by not disclosing all assets or not appearing as required. Bankruptcy is dismissed, or in a case of creditors are free to put the account back in collection cycle. So it says, which of the following is not true? A dismissal means the petitioner is declared insolvent, assets are liquidated, and the petitioner is protected. Even if the responsible party does not specifically list the hospital debt in a Chapter 7 filing, the debt is automatically included in the petition. So your hospital is not listed in the bankruptcy. Fault. If the responsible party fails to list a hospital debt, it is not included in the petition and the collection efforts can be continued. Which of the following is not true of determining the responsible party for an account? Select one. Responsible party is the adult patient, him or her, even in the case of injuries caused by neglect. Some states, spouses are responsible for each other's debt incurred during the marriage. Adult children of deceased person are legally responsible for any debts related to the deceased. And then both parents are jointly and fully responsible for a minor. So again, remember, to the following is not true? Adult children of deceased person are legally responsible for the debt. They are not. Conservator is another term meaning responsible party, true or false. This was a little added bullet after we talked about responsible parties. That is false. A conservator is court appointed to handle the affairs of someone who cannot, but they are not personally responsible for the debt. So that's why. Which of the following is not true of the steps to take when receiving notice that a patient is deceased? So what is something following is not true? And you only select one. Check if it's a legitimate estate exists and file the appropriate caveat on the estate. Check the register of wills. Change the mailing address to the family. If there is no estate, no one assumes financial responsibility. And there's our answer. Couple more here. Which of the following is not true of a courtesy discharge? Select one. Improves patient-hospital relations, improves traffic flow, reduces the need for additional staff at peak discharge time, result in more billing errors because there is one less opportunity to validate the information. Again, results in more billing errors because there is one less opportunity to validate. Which of the following is not a common stall or delay with third-party payers? Again, this one was kind of a little bit earlier in our presentation. And it would be contractual requirements to hold a claim for a certain number of days. Which of the following is not an essential step when making in-house collection calls? Review the account for payment adjustments, determine if any or previous collection efforts have been made, prepare all questions and facts, speak in detail to whomever answers the phone so they can convey urgency to the responsible party. Be the last one. We don't speak to just anybody. We want to make sure we're speaking to the appropriate person. What is the name for a recorded claim against real or personal property where if the debtor sells the property, the creditor must be paid out of those proceeds? And you would select just one of those answers. And that would be the lien. Which of the following is true of Medicare bad debt policies? Excuse me. And select one. When claimed on the cost report, a percentage of debt is reimbursed to the provider. Only hospital services are reimbursable. Hospital must attempt to collect the account for at least 90 days with no payments from the patient during that time before claimed as bad debt. No type of charity can ever be claimed as a bad debt. Oh, and I highlighted the wrong one. Oh, no, this is true. Sorry. Actually, my apologies. It's D. You have 120 days to claim. What does Section 501 of the Affordable Care Act deal with? Give you a minute to read that. deals with requirements of charitable tax-exempt hospitals. Which metrics shows the percentage of dollars referred to a collection agency that are returned to the provider and thus allows for easy comparison of collections? And that would be our debt, or net, sorry, not debt, net recovery rate. Which metrics calculated by dividing net bad debt by net revenue? That would be the net bad debt percentage. So as I mentioned earlier, I thought we would give you a little bit more time back probably because this section is not nearly as long as some of the others. I do want to give you guys some positive vibes, you know, I'm a huge quote person. So recipe for success: study while others are sleeping, very true. Work while others are loafing, prepare while others are playing, and dream while others are wishing. You know, study hard, grab those little quiet moments when you can. I know you guys are going to all pass. I can't wait to see you guys on our platform that's passing the CRCP exam. Any questions, let me know. I wish you guys the best of luck. You can also reach me here. Here's my email address for work. My cell phone number always available. As mentioned, I am currently the chair for National for Certification, also the past president of Wisconsin. So I welcome any questions. If not, you get a half hour to your day, so you could use that extra little 25 minutes to study. Otherwise, that concludes my presentation today, you guys.
Marcy, we do have a question that just came in.
Yep.
There are some acts like the Truth Lending Act, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, Fair Credit Billing Act. So do we have to know more on these acts in order to handle the credit and collections for the certification?
All the regulations and that we all talked about, like in excess, when we're talking fair debt collections and telephone acts and all those, are all important to fully understand. So that's one reason the access part was so long, is because we had such a large section of regulations. You definitely need to know what those all stand for, the importance of them. The key to a lot of this, which I was in the industry for probably 30 years before I took the exam, a lot of it is understanding the rules and regulations and not focusing on how your internal facility handles things, like how you handle bankruptcies or discharges. You got to really focus on what is in the AHAM manuals and really focus on understanding the differences.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions right now.
Okay. I know what happens sometimes. You get off of this and you start thinking and questions pop up after the fact. So again, I welcome any questions. You can just email me and I will help you as best as I can with any of those questions.
Okay, great. On behalf of AHAM, we'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and also have to send a big thank you to Marcy for an excellent presentation. I'd now like to direct your attention to the survey that I've just brought up on your screen. If everyone could take a moment to fill out this brief survey, AHAM does appreciate your feedback. This concludes today's session. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye, guys.